for the link to get live, and there's always a little bit of a delay before people see it. So I just wait a few seconds to get started, and we're 10 seconds in, so we'll just go ahead and get started. Right. Welcome to Stories at Sundown. I'm Mac McCullough from Willard Library. Good evening. Glad you could join us. I hope you're all recovering from the election. And with us tonight, we have Deputy Chief Jim Grafton of the Battle Creek Police Department. Jim, welcome. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Back and for all our viewers out there.
Yeah, and I mentioned this actually when I gave a little plug a week ago that I was going to have you on, that, I got to know you a little bit about a year and a half ago, or maybe it's been a couple years ago. Time flies. Time flies.
I know, right.
And I said I had the kind of ride in a police vehicle that you want to have, because we went to Flint. But one of the things that stuck out in my mind about the conversation, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but that we had shared a mutual love of the show Blue Bloods, and so I thought, what a great opportunity to bring you on and talk a little bit about, favorite police characters. And so we'll get into that a little bit later, but just a little bit about you. I gather you're a native. You graduated from Harper Creek. Am I right about that?
That's correct.
Yeah. And you've been with the Battle Creek Police Department for 26 years. Is that right?
I'm 24 and a half.
24 and a half.
7 months until I hit my 25th year.
Okay. All right. So the first question I have for you is what?
That's all right. So yeah, you went mute there, but I think you asked the question, what kind of drew me to law enforcement? Is that correct? All right. Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm a first-generation officer in my family. I come from a family of preachers, pastors, and professors, and that's what my family was and is from both sides, my mom's side and my dad's side. However, I went to a small Christian school in my major for college, and I went to go play baseball, and my major was communication. I had the dream of being the next ESPN sports anchor. Well, that dream never panned out, although I still think about it to this day, what would have been or could have been. But, it was, I believe that God works in ways that, we may never fully understand. But in 1989, I graduated from Harper Creek High School. Well, let me back up for just a second. So I was born and raised in Cleveland.
You got a message from our friend here, by the way.
Oh,
do you see that?
Oh, yeah. What's up, Jeremy? How you doing, buddy?
Anyway.
That's right. I was just telling Mac before we came on, I've known you for about 20 plus years in the work we did up in the Post edition. So that's a pleasant memory for me. But yeah, I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and I lived there till I was 10 or 11 years old. My dad took a church up here. He was a pastor. And he took on Battle Creek Friends Church, and I was a huge sports fan. So Indians, Browns, Cavs, and yes, even Ohio State. That stuck with me. But
careful.
Yeah. So I played sports growing up, and was decent enough to get some offers to play, football and baseball. I chose to play baseball, and but my freshman year in college, my dad decided to move back to Ohio with my mom, and he took a church down in Columbus, Ohio. I decided to stay up here and continue to play baseball and go to school, and unfortunately the ESPN career didn't pan out. And I needed a job, and I was working downtown, and I was a Burns security officer. And I worked down there for about 3 years, just making ends meet, living up here on my own and living with a couple buddies. But that's when I met some officers from Battle Creek Police Department. And there was an old bar downtown. It was called Pablo's. And it was right downtown in McCamley Place. And I worked the 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift every Friday and Saturday night. And oftentimes we would request Battle Creek Police Department to come down and assist with disorderlies or, fights or whatever. And so I got to know some of them. And one night an officer came up to me and said, "You ever thought about being an officer?" I was like, "No." They're like, "Why don't you come do a ride along?" Well, I did one ride along and it stuck, right?
Wow.
I immediately changed my major, went into criminal justice, graduated, and I ended up getting hired down in Reading, Michigan, which is a very small town in Hillsdale County, 1 square mile, 1,100 people. I was there for about 6 or 7 months, and I got hired by Emmett Township. And of course, that's my home turf right there. So I worked there for a little bit over 2 years, and they got hired by Battle Creek and been here. So that's kind of my journey in a nutshell. I didn't plan on it. Nobody in my family has ever been in law enforcement, and I have a sister that is in the medical profession, and she's been a nurse, a surgical nurse now for about 30 years. And but other than that, yeah, my brother right now is still is a pastor at Battle Creek Friends Church. So so he's keeping it in the family at least.
And when you told me that, I was, and this might betray maybe stereotype on my part. I don't know. I thought it was surprising to me that someone from Friends Church would choose law enforcement. But maybe I don't know enough about the church to make that kind of a judgment. But I am curious about how the church's teachings and influenced your work and your development and where you are today as an officer.
Well, I'm going to tell you a personal story that really affected me. So I told you that my dad in 1989, he moved back to Columbus, Ohio, and it was a short time later he was diagnosed with cancer. And my dad was my best friend. I could talk to him about anything. And I just thought, man, how could a man like my father, a man of great moral character, a great leader, a great father, a great husband. My mom was just as awesome. I'm very fortunate to have the mom and dad that I did. But I got angry, and my dad was given 6 months to live, and he ended up living 2 years, and I'm thankful for that time. Mm-hmm. But I walked away from my faith. I had walked away, and I was doing anything and everything I could to stay away from church. I stayed away from my faith, my personal convictions, and I was not going down a road that was conducive to be a healthy lifestyle. And during this time, I had made the decision to become a police officer. When I first entered into law enforcement, I was still being taught by some individuals that had been around for a long time, and they were policing in a manner that, I was kind of shocked about. It shocked me. I was like, man, I didn't expect this, right? Going through the academy, you learn, different ways, and, you learn the laws and juvenile law and court proceedings and, how to deal with a drunk driver, but you just didn't have an idea of what it was going to be like when you get out there on the street. And so, I went through the first couple of years of law enforcement, still kind of bright-eyed and, just really not fully understanding. I got hired by Battle Creek, and I've been very fortunate here. But a couple of years into my employment here at Battle Creek Police Department, I made a personal change. I made a personal decision to go back and renew my faith. But I also made a choice that I'm going to change the way that I police. And it was a conscious decision. Not that I was doing anything illegal or immoral, right? It was just like I didn't have the citizen's best interest at hand. I just, I was taking the call and I was doing what I needed to do, but it felt empty. I don't know if that makes sense or not. It just felt empty. And so I made a change internally and said, you know what, I'm going to try this new way of policing. And that's really when I started to get to know Jeremy and some of the other viewers that may be out there. But I started working up in the post edition. I worked afternoon shift and, started working on some projects and really just kind of dove into some of the root problems that are going on up in that community. It's one of the best decisions I ever made, Mac.
Yeah.
It just changed my trajectory. It changed how I felt. And I felt like, man, I'm making a difference, right? I know I can't save the world. But if I can help one person out, it's worth the journey. And I feel like I've been able to do that, and I've certainly been blessed and, to continue to move up through the ranks. Again, this wasn't a goal of mine. This wasn't a destination that I had planned when I came into law enforcement. But again, as I stated earlier, I just think that the Lord works in ways that we just fully don't understand. And I'm very blessed and fortunate to be where I'm at. So that's kind of my story, and I'm very happy.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, and when we got to know each other, that was one of the things that impressed me about you is your willingness to be vulnerable. And I mean that in the sense that, totally disarmed. Take your armor off and be yourself. And we got to know each other when we were introducing the work of the trauma, the ACE study, trauma informed everything, whether it's police work or schools or health professionals or what have you. And you talked a lot then about recognizing how many of the people that you maybe arrest or the home situations you're going into, you're adding trauma to lives that are already traumatized. Can you talk a little bit about that revelation?
Yeah, when we talk about ACE, for those of you that may not be aware of it, it's the adverse childhood experiences, where young youth can experience. I think there was 10 categories or 10 questions that
Right.
Was the criteria that if you met this criteria, you had an adverse childhood experience. Well, the 10th one, as I remember it, was have you ever had a family member that was arrested, I think, or put in prison, gone to jail? I can't, again, I'm paraphrasing, but
yeah.
As I took this 10 question quiz, not quiz, but when I did these 10 questions myself, I answered no to all of them. But really, the last one stuck out to me that I was like, man, I've never had a family member that went to prison. However, I have arrested people that went to jail and ended up in prison. So, and whether there was a young child in the family or not, I've made hundreds and hundreds of arrests in just shy of 28 years. But I was like, okay, so we as law enforcement, we can add to a person's adverse childhood experience. And so it just got me thinking, and I was like, man, we need to be more aware of, our actions and unintended consequences of what we do for a living. I'm not saying that those folks, they didn't deserve to go to jail, but just understanding the impact that it can have on the families that are left behind when we leave with a loved one in the back of a patrol car and take them to the county jail, then we're seeking serious charges on them, right? So that was eye-opening for me, and we also started learning, as you talked about, trauma informed, in dealing with victims of violent crimes.
Right.
Again, I continue to learn and say we can do a better job in dealing with that, and I'm proud of the work that we've done here at this department in doing that. And I know I may be jumping the gun, but we've hired a victim advocate who works through the Battle Creek Community Foundation, and she has come on board, and she is our victim advocate that works with the victim advocate out of David Gilbert's office, the prosecutor. Mm-hmm. And we're also working with the Detroit Crime Commission. And we're just very fortunate to have a lot of resources here at the Battle Creek Police Department and within our community that can help with these trauma-informed victims, or these traumatized victims.
Right.
Yeah, traumatized victims. And it's just, it's been an amazing experience to be a part of.
Yeah, we could do hours just on that subject alone, but effectively what we've learned through the ACE study, that was the seminal study published in '98, is that really harsh experiences in childhood and in life create reactions in the body that stay with the body and have big effects on behavior. Mm-hmm. And understanding the origins of what you're confronting can give you tools to de-escalate, and can give you tools to relate. And thank you. That's why we drove to Flint. We were a panelist. We were on a panel discussion in Flint about what we were doing in Battle Creek around the subject. So,
and that was the very beginning. And although ACES is still around. The work has just expanded and grown as a result of that, and it has for me personally,
Yeah.
with Chief Blocker as well, and it just has allowed us to really train in a way that I didn't think that we would do it, but it's been nothing but positive.
Well, a couple of years ago, I think before I really knew you, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with the chief. Who's got to be on this show at some point in the near future.
Right.
But so we won't talk about him too much. But no, we talked a lot about how trauma and a lot of professions that work with people, and social workers, police, school teachers, but really everywhere, because it's all of us. We bring trauma with us. But then the trauma the things that officers see in the course of their duty, in the course of their work, it has an impact. And so that's probably part of the learning as well, has it not?
Oh, absolutely. We talk about mental health and mental health for the officers and first responders. I mean, it's a valid concern, right? The divorce rate amongst law enforcement officers is skyrocketing. It's double what it is in the general population, right? There are addictions out there. There's alcoholism. There's marital issues. There's pornography. There's pills. We're still human beings. We wear this uniform, and this is our job, right? We took an oath to protect the community in which we serve. But at the end of the day, we're still human beings, and we're seeing a lot of bad stuff. Mac, I can tell you right now that I've been involved in several critical incidents in my years of service, right? From shootings and stabbings. And I'm very fortunate to be here today, to be able to sit here unharmed and be able to talk with you. But I have been a part of those. And I can remember those instances. One that happened 23 years ago, right? And it's like it happened yesterday.
Yeah.
The detective Laverne Brand, right? Yeah. The day that he was shot and killed, I was working and I was the first one there. Ron Munster gets stabbed. Brandon Halting gets shot. Rob Miller gets shot. All of these things that I've been a part of has helped me be a better officer and a better man. But those are things, the culture in law enforcement did not allow an officer to speak freely about those things, right? It was really encouraged to kind of like, suck it up. You're a cop, you'll be fine. You're going to see this throughout your entire career. If you can't handle this, then you better get out of the profession.
Yeah.
Well, those days have changed. We set up peer support teams. We contract with the city's employee, the EAP program, the Employee Assistance Program. We work so much with Summit Point and with Jeannie Goodrich and her team there, the CIT training. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. And it's neat to be a part of that culture change for the better in law enforcement.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about this before we went on the air. I mean, it's been an interesting, tough time, I would imagine. I won't put words in your mouth, but to be a police officer at a time with a lot of scrutiny on police officers, on law enforcement, and how has that felt for you? And how have you and the chief and your colleagues and fellow officers responded?
Well, the first thing I try and do is not personalize it, because the moment I personalize it, I become emotional and I get angry. But we need to have scrutiny, right? We need to be looked at. And so, we want to be as transparent as possible in our training, right? In our contracts, in our policies and procedures. We want to be transparent. This is why we're getting 65 body-worn cameras, right? Coming up in the next 90 days. This is why we're getting 40 new in-car cameras. So that is huge for us. We want to be open and transparent. We want to have these conversations. And I believe that over the last 7 years under the current leadership, we've been able to have those conversations. And, I think it was, proved the day after, shortly after George Floyd was killed up in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
We had some protests down here. And we spoke with some of the leaders of those protests, and we worked together. And, we had peaceful protests. We had the march. I think it was like an 8-mile march after the Friendship Park protest. Mm-hmm. And so I know next week is Dr. Alicia Johnson. She was instrumental in some others that we had in those conversations that, it just worked out that well. So I get angry, right? I see some officers that do some bad things on video, and they need to be held accountable. They should be, held accountable and go through the criminal justice system just like anybody else. But I also don't want to be quick to judge, right? I've learned that there's always two sides of the story, and I like investigations to fully, take effect and go through. And then if the officer is wrong, he needs to be held accountable, or she needs to be held accountable. But man, if the officer is, if his actions are substantiated and they were right, then they're right. So it's tough for me to sit here and say that, I'm one way or the other. Certain things have angered me. It's been difficult. But you know what? We continue to fight. We continue to have conversations in a respectful manner, and I'll do that all day, every day. At the end of the day, Mac, if you and I disagree on something, that's okay. The next day I see you, I'm going to say, how you doing, my friend? And I'm going to mean it, right? Just because we disagree on something doesn't mean that we can't be friends. So, again, proud to be here, proud of the work that's being done. But it has been a struggle at times.
Sure.
We navigate through this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I do want to talk a little bit about the literary side of our interview today. But it's kind of a nice segue, because I think when we talk about, at least when I have police officer characters or law enforcement characters, the ones that I gravitate to most are very complicated, flawed, but they have within them an integrity that I find, relatable. And so the first thing you shared with me, and I don't know if you have others that you wanted to bring up, but Blue Bloods, we had a common interest in the show Blue Bloods. What is it you like about Blue Bloods? And tell folks a little bit about it if you want, about the show.
Well, like I said in my email to you, I can't believe that you remembered that, but yeah, we did talk about that. I find it interesting. People ask me, do you watch NCIS or CSI or any, and I really don't watch police shows, but I watched an episode of Blue Bloods, and I was gravitated towards Frank Reagan, the character played by Tom Selleck.
Commissioner Reagan.
Yeah. First of all, I'm a huge Tom Selleck fan. I remember watching him in Magnum PI, right, as a young kid, and watched him throughout, Western movies and other shows. But I really liked his demeanor. And, of course, his position as the commissioner of NYPD, it doesn't compare to the deputy chief of Battle Creek Police, but leadership is leadership, right? Yeah. And so there's a couple things that I really liked about it. And as you asked me about this in the email, I was thinking about it. In the episodes, they usually end every episode with a family dinner.
Yeah.
I grew up doing that, Mac. Every night at 5:30, dinner was on the table, and my two sisters, my brother and I, were expected to be there at 5:30. And that was 7 days a week. My mother would have dinner on the table, and we would have great dialogue, great conversation. And then every night when we ended dinner, my dad would do a devotion. And man, I'm kind of getting chills just thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is a great memory. So I think of this show and I relate to that, but I also relate to him as a police commissioner. And so he's oftentimes being put in positions by the officers or the sergeants or all of his subordinates, right? In NYPD in real life has 40,000 officers, 40,000 sworn officers. And, what I like is he has his team of confidants, right? That he's got his, deputy commissioner, he's got a lieutenant, and then he's got his detective that is his admin assistant. And it's like that small team, and he listens to them. He seeks out their point of view. And then he gathers all the information, and then he makes a decision. But he also holds himself accountable. That's a trait that I really like in that particular character.
Yeah.
So I'm not a huge cop show fan, but Blue Bloods, I DVR it, right? I DVR it and I watch it, and I'm looking forward to this fall.
Yeah, what I like about it, we talked a little bit about this. I mean, there's clearly an old school, more rough and tumble style of policing that is not dead. I mean, it's still there. There are officers in probably most departments that cross those lines. And he has a son in this show who crosses those lines, and he is straddling that tension all the time.
Yeah.
Wanting to stand up for his officers, but also recognizing when they cross the line, trying to hold them to a higher standard. But he's also a little bit flawed in that he can be very mercurial and fly off the handle. But what I love about the show, and to me, it's just and this is what good TV shows do or good books do, is that this character has I'd say, confidence to listen. And if he made a mistake, say he made a mistake. And I find that refreshing. And I do love the family scenes. It's just the family around the table. I didn't have quite that. I mean, that's a huge family, huge Irish family. So, and I think, and so I always, and people who watch this all the time know that I just love this author. Have you ever read any James Lee Burke?
I have not.
Oh, his most famous character is Dave Robichaux, who is a police officer. He was in NOP, New Orleans Police Department. He is an alcoholic. He has violent tendencies. He came from a violent family. He was a Vietnam veteran, saw a lot. The characters are just haunted, often by their past. What I love about the David Robichaux character is his empathy for his community and for the people he defends, but also oftentimes the people he prosecutes. And one particular instance, and it really kind of ties back into what we talk about with understanding how when people grow up or raised in abusive situations or deprived of basic needs and safety, their lives are on a trajectory. It's very difficult to leave. And I remember in one book, I can't remember which one, he makes the statement that, yeah, there's evil in the world, but most people are just doing the best they can. And yet he and his disgraced cop partner, best friend, Cleet Purcell, also the recurring character in there, they've got their problems, but they see themselves as sticking up for the little guy, sticking up for people, and standing against people who abuse their power and their influence. And so it's, I just get hooked on every one. Another thing that he says is that I wrote it down because I just think it's so. James Lee Burke's work is epic. I mean, he takes on these really big spiritual, mystical issues. His writing is just amazing. But this quote from Dave Robichaux: "The most important battles happen in places no one cares about." And I just thought that was so profound in the book, but also in the times that we're going in. When I look out at the political turmoil and when I see where the anger is so palpable, it's from people who feel that they live in places that no one cares about. They feel unseen, unheard, unappreciated, or looked down upon. And so he just taps all those themes in these books that I just, I recommend them a lot. I have had a few people get hooked on them, so maybe I can get you hooked on them too.
Yeah,
it's and there's been a couple of movies. Tommy Lee Jones starred in one of the, I think the Earl, I can't remember the name of it now. But it's really cool. And another series that I like watching, and I've not read any of the books that inspired it, is Longmire. Have you ever watched Longmire?
I have.
You didn't like it. I can tell.
I watched probably 3 or 4 of them, and my wife actually asked me about it, and I was like, you know what, I gave it a chance, and yeah.
Well, to each his own.
Right.
Yeah, but Longmire again. Walt Longmire is a Western sheriff, and part of what probably turns me on a little bit is he carries and there's my aunt, actually my dad's half sister.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to call her aunt because she's a little younger than me. But she'll get a kick out of the fact that one of the things I like about Longmire is he carries that Winchester, and I have a couple of those Winchesters, the lever action Winchester.
Oh yeah.
But he is again, I think his commitment to community. One of the things I liked about him when I first saw the episodes, he's always picking up litter. I mean, he's just that kind of guy. But he's also complicated and has his demons. And I think that obviously I was a reporter for a long time. I've had a lot of relationships with police officers in my career, and it's a tough job, and as Brandon Hultig says in his book, and I haven't read it yet, and I promise that I will. What you call the backpack. What you carry on your back. You keep stuffing it. And I just think that more understanding and more empathy for each other, whether it's law enforcement or us muckraking journalists who stick our nose in, or badger cops at the scene, or demand stuff, whatever the case might be, a little more empathy about where we're coming from. It goes a long way, and books to me help us do that. Yeah. I mean, because it's easier to see it in someone else than see it in yourself and learn from it. Yeah. And you said something to me, either in an email, must have been an email, to talk to your wife. You do learn from the characters and how you do that, how you do your job.
Yeah. The thing about Blue Bloods is that, and I don't know about other police shows, but Blue Bloods, they send a script to an ex-officer just to make sure that it's, the jargon is right or whatnot. And that's what I like, because when I hear some things that, maybe people don't understand, I get them. And so it's kind of vetted by a former NYPD officer. I don't know who it is, but I thought that was kind of cool. I don't know if other shows do that or not, but it just kind of makes it more realistic for me. And,
yeah.
I often say, okay, that scenario is close to something that I just handled, or that is, currently being investigated now. How would they handle it, right? And does it apply in real life? Sometimes. Oftentimes it doesn't, right? But there are things that you can take and learn from and apply in real life.
Right. Yeah. Any other characters you wanted to bring up, or was that it?
No, that's it. I'm reading. This is a good book, Captain Michael Abershoff. It's Your Ship. It's a leadership book. So he's a naval commander that took over a ship and worked his way up through the Navy, but it's really about leadership and whatnot. So
yeah,
just trying to learn and continue to be the best Jim Grafton I can be.
So. Well, you're doing a pretty good job, Jim. So thank you. And we're already 34. I told you it went fast. So we're 34 minutes in. So it's I really appreciate you coming on. And we'll have to work on the chief. Get the chief on here too at some point in the future. Right. You mentioned earlier that Alicia Johnson is on a week from now, and there's another nice comment.
Oh,
thank you. And so we have a few things. I actually picked out a book called Burnout, but we're really looking at, and I think it's The Time Is Great, because I mean, geez, does this ever end? We have the election, we have all this conflict. We have, we're I think averaging 3 or 4 people a week at the library that have to be in isolation because they came in contact. We've been very fortunate that we haven't had any transmissions at the library, and because we have a lot of practices, but all this stuff weighs on you. And so how do you take a breath, get through it? We're all going to be okay. we're here for each other. So I'm really excited about having Alicia on next week. And then, of course, Jeremy, who chimed in a little bit ago, is on for the 19th, right, Jeremy? Jeremy's canceled me a couple times. Anyway. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Jim. Thank you, everybody. And I will see you next week at 7 o'clock right here. You take care and have a great weekend.